The Harborview Diner was unusually quiet that evening as a group of federal agents led away a few men in expensive suits, accompanied by a few leather-clad bikers. You'd never have guessed that just 3 months ago, the Death Riders were an untouchable criminal force with influence reaching from street corners to corporate boardrooms. It's hard to imagine that their downfall began with a single confrontation over a spilled coffee. And nobody knew that the Marine they had threatened was the woman who would. Rebecca Beeks Anderson is a Force Recon Marine with 20 years of counterintelligence experience. She's also the force behind the largest organized crime takedown in coastal history. In this story, we'll see how her tactical brilliance exposed it wasn't just a biker gang, but a sophisticated criminal network that had corrupted the very institutions meant to stop them. It's a story of how the deadliest battles aren't won with brute force, but with patience, intelligence, and perfect timing. And it's proof that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one making threats, but the quiet observer turning their own power against them. But to understand how a simple evening at a diner led to the collapse of a criminal empire spanning 3 continents, we need to go back to where it all began. Before we continue, let me ask you a quick question. Where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, please make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The evening breeze carried the first hints of an approaching storm as Major Rebecca Anderson settled into her corner booth at Harborview Diner. She had been in the Marine Corps for 20 years, so she was very used to discipline and order. She studied the unusual quiet that had settled over the normally bustling establishment. The familiar clatter of plates and murmur of conversation had been replaced by a tense silence broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Lisa Martinez approached Rebecca's table with a coffee pot in her hand, trembling slightly. In her hand, the diner owner's usual warm smile was gone, replaced by a look of fear. "They're getting bolder," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "The Death Riders. They're not just demanding protection money anymore." Rebecca had noticed the changes over the past few weeks. The vibrant waterfront district, once the pride of their community, had grown eerily quiet. Small businesses were closing, tourists were disappearing, and fear had crept in like a toxic tide poisoning everything it touched. "Tell me everything," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had guided counterintelligence operations across 3 continents. Lisa rolled up her sleeve, revealing dark bruises when Marco refused to pay triple their usual demand. They didn't just threaten him, they destroyed his fishing boat. Police reports vanished, security cameras malfunctioned, and nobody would stand up to them. The rumble of motorcycles cut through the evening air. It wasn't the usual weekend riders enjoying the coastal roads, but something more deliberate and menacing. 5 choppers roared into the car park, their engines deliberately loud. Their riders were wearing leather cuts emblazoned with crimson skulls and crossed lightning bolts. Rebecca's intelligence training kicked in automatically as she noted details, assessed threats, and identified vulnerabilities. The leader, a mountain of a man they called Duke, stumbled as he dismounted, empty whiskey bottles clattering across the asphalt. His crew, Razor, Ghost Tank, and Viper, spread out in a practiced formation that spoke of a military background. Oh, they weren't just drunk bikers looking for trouble. Their movements showed training and coordination. "Get in the kitchen," Rebecca told Lisa quietly. "Call Detective Parker and tell her it's happening again, please." Lisa grabbed her arm. "These men," she said, "they put Marco in the hospital. Nobody can stop them." "That's where you're wrong," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the calm certainty that had steadied teams through the worst operations in her career. "Nobody has stopped them yet." Rebecca watched Duke and his crew swagger into the diner. They were so confident, so sure of themselves. Boots echoing on the tiled floor. Some patrons shrank away, while others were frozen in fear. She noted each detail, the way Duke favored his right side, suggesting an old injury, how Ghost constantly scanned for cameras, and the slight bulge under Viper's cut, indicating concealed weapons. Duke's voice boomed through the diner, slurred but threatening. "Just here to discuss some business with the owner. Don't let us interrupt your meals." Lisa had disappeared into the kitchen, but Rebecca was there to help. Joey, her teenage son, was trying his best to look brave as he continued bussing tables. The poor boy's hands were shaking as he cleared dishes, but he was staying as far from the bikers as possible. Duke spotted Rebecca in her corner booth. His bloodshot eyes narrowed as he studied her relaxed posture. Something about her stillness must have triggered a warning in his alcohol-addled brain because he paused, taking a longer look. Well, he sneered, changing direction to approach her table. "Looks like we got ourselves a soldier girl," he said, his voice full of affection. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "VA benefits not covering the coffee these days, bless." Rebecca remained perfectly still, her mind already mapping out scenarios, calculating angles, identifying the optimal moment to strike. But this wasn't about winning a fight, it was about gathering intelligence. Every word, every movement, every reaction would tell her something about their organization. "The coffee's fine," she replied evenly, "though I imagine it's hard to taste anything after that much whiskey." Duke's amusement turned to anger. Nobody challenged the Death Riders, particularly not a woman sitting on her own in a diner. He stepped closer, attempting to use his size to intimidate. "Maybe you need a lesson in respect," he said, his voice calm and measured. "An interesting choice of words," Rebecca replied, her own voice remaining calm even as she noted his crew spreading out to cut off escape routes. "Duke, do you teach respect before or after you destroy someone's life?" she asked. Hood the biker's face darkened. "You don't know who you're talking to," he replied. "Actually, I do. I'm former Force Recon, dishonorably discharged in 19. And you and your crew have been running. It's a sad fact that protection rackets are rife up and down the coast. Recently, though, there's been a worrying increase in incidents. It's made me wonder who's really giving the orders." The change was subtle but immediate. The other bikers tensed their hands, moving toward concealed weapons. Duke's eyes, normally full of bravado, were red-rimmed and tearful. He was clearly struggling to control his emotions. "You've been asking questions about us," he growled. "That's not healthy, neither is terrorizing my community." Rebecca replied, still not moving from her relaxed position. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your crew. I'm sure you'll agree that it would be best for everyone if you stopped harassing business owners and told whoever's pulling your strings that their operation just came under new management." Duke lunged forward with his massive fist swinging in a practiced arc. But Rebecca was already moving, years of combat training taking over before the other bikers could react. Their leader was face down on the table, his arm locked behind his back at a painful angle. "First lesson," Rebecca said quietly, maintaining the hold with minimal effort and real power. "It's not about intimidation, it's about understanding your opponent's weaknesses through the diner's window." Red and blue lights began to flash. Detective Olivia Parker's cruiser pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 more units. The Death Rider's attention split, giving Rebecca the opening she needed. Second lesson, she continued applying slightly more pressure to Duke's arm. Always know which fights are distractions and which ones really matter. What the Death Riders didn't realize was that this confrontation wasn't just about stopping harassment at a diner. Oh no, it was the first move in a carefully planned operation that would expose corruption at every level of power in their coastal city. The war for Harborview was about to begin, and Major Rebecca Anderson was going to teach the Death Riders a thing or two. While you never bring street tactics to a military intelligence fight. 20 minutes later, Rebecca sat across from Detective Olivia Parker in the station's interview room, watching the detective review footage from the diner security. The camera on the grainy screen showed Duke and his crew being led away in handcuffs. Their earlier bravado had been replaced by barely contained rage, public intoxication, attempted assault, and making criminal threats. Parker was scrolling through her tablet, "But we both know they'll be out before morning." "Of course they will," Rebecca replied, studying the detective's reaction. "The question is who makes those charges disappear." Parker's jaw tightened as she glanced at the observation window, then lowered her voice. "From cybercrime to homicide, I started noticing patterns. Cases involving the death of writers get reassigned, evidence goes missing, witnesses change their stories, and it goes higher than the police department." Rebecca noted, "I've been mapping their protection racket. The patterns don't match typical gang behavior. Their targets are too specific, and their operations are too sophisticated." "What do you mean?" Parker asked. Rebecca pulled out her phone and showed Parker a map marked with recent gang activity. "Look at their expansion pattern. They're not just targeting. It's so sad. These vulnerable businesses, they're establishing distribution points. The harbor gives them multiple access routes, but heavy civilian traffic masks their movements. And their protection fees are just cover for something bigger." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story, a knock at the door. The door interrupted them. Officer Jenkins entered looking a little uncomfortable. "The chief wants to see you," he said. "It's urgent." "Bet it is," Parker muttered after he left. "Every time we get close to something involving the Death Riders, I get pulled off for more pressing cases. They're watching. That's why they sent Duke to the diner tonight, Rebecca explained. Someone told them I've been. Through the window, they watched as Duke and his crew were released. Their charges had mysteriously been reduced to minor infractions as they collected their belongings. Duke looked directly at the observation window and smiled. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Parker said, her voice full of frustration. It's as if they think they're untouchable, but that's their mistake. Oh dear. Rebecca stood, gathering her notes. It seems they've gotten so comfortable with their power that they've forgotten the basics of operational security. What's their second mistake? Assuming I'm working alone. Rebecca handed Parker a secure phone. I've got contacts in federal agencies. People who specialize in dismantling criminal networks. But first, we need to understand exactly what. Rebecca transformed her apartment into an operational center, with maps covering the walls, surveillance photos connected with red string, financial records spread across every surface, and 3 laptops displaying different data streams, police frequencies, traffic camera feeds, and a complex pattern recognition algorithm she developed during her time overseas. Intelligence work overseas. Her phone buzzed with a call from Parker at the station. Her map, the protection racket, is just cover for moving something bigger through the port. I wonder what they could be smuggling that requires this level of institutional protection. A message popped up on one of her laptops. Facial recognition had identified 2 of Duke's crew entering an upscale restaurant across town through traffic cameras. Rebecca watched as they met with a man. In an expensive suit, the kind that speaks of corporate power rather than street crime, he got eyes on Razor and Ghost. She told Parker, they're meeting someone. James Morrison, the corporate security chief for BlackRock Industries. Why would a legitimate security executive be meeting with gang members at midnight? BlackRock just got approved for a major development project along the waterfront. It's the same area where the Death Riders have been most active. Rebecca's mind worked through the connections. They're not just a gang anymore. They're muscle for something much bigger. Corporate developers, corrupt officials, organized crime. All working together to control the waterfront. She watched Morrison hand the bikers an envelope. The waterfront is where all the action is. It's also where the Death Riders have been hanging out. Rebecca's mind was racing through all the possible connections. They're not just a gang anymore. They're muscle for something much bigger. It's like they're working with corporate developers, corrupt officials, and even organized crime. All of them together to control the waterfront through her surveillance feed. She watched Morrison hand the bikers an envelope. A few moments later, her pattern recognition software flagged some unusual financial transfers. It seems that large sums of money were moving through shell companies and offshore accounts. These legitimate businesses were actually turning into money laundering operations. The Death Riders think they're players, but they're just tools being used by people with much more sophisticated goals. That's why they can operate with impunity. It's so unfair. They've got protection from people who control the system itself. All of a sudden, the lights in her apartment went out. It was just a power outage, but it was too localized to be accidental. Through her window, Rebecca spotted 2 motorcycles circling the block. Their riders were wearing the now familiar Death Riders cuts. They're here, she told Parker calmly. You need backup, no? I watched the bikers through my thermal scope and thought to myself, I need them to think they're in control. Every move they make, every threat they try just helps us understand their organization better. The bikers sprayed graffiti on her garage door, a crude skull with a target drawn through it. It was amateur intimidation tactics, but they confirmed something important. They're scared. Rebecca noted, professional criminals don't make threats, they act. This kind of display means we're getting close to something they can't afford to have exposed. As the motorcycles roared away, Rebecca added their descriptions and license plates to her growing database. The Death Riders thought they were delivering a warning, but they just provided more evidence of their connection to corporate corruption. I'm starting to see the full picture. I told Parker that the Death Riders are just one piece of a larger operation. It seems that someone is using them to clear out the waterfront. They're using violence and intimidation to force out small businesses so that developers can move in. But that's just the visible part. The real operation is hidden behind legitimate business deals and political connections. How on earth do we fight something this big? I'll tell you how. I took down insurgent networks overseas, and I can do the same here. Rebecca replied, studying her map of connections. You don't attack their strength. You expose their vulnerabilities. Every system they build to protect themselves becomes a point of failure when properly exploited. The war for Harborview was entering a new phase. The Death Riders thought. Intimidation would have been the easy way out, but they didn't go that route. Instead, they helped Rebecca identify the first threads of a conspiracy that reached from street corners to corporate boardrooms. Rebecca Anderson was just getting started. Dawn painted Harborview in shades of gold as Rebecca conducted surveillance from a rented room overlooking the waterfront through her high-powered optics. She watched the Death Riders establishing new patterns, more organized and more militant than typical gang operations. Movement at the South Pier. She reported to Parker over their secure line. Ghost is coordinating with dock workers. They're creating gaps in security coverage. I've noticed that there are a few moments when the area around the port is less busy. My FBI contact Parker has just sent me some interesting information. It seems that BlackRock Industries has set up a number of companies to buy up properties along the waterfront. It looks like they're planning to expand their operations. Rebecca also mentioned that they've been photographing the area and passing envelopes to port officials. It seems like they're trying to establish a presence. I've been keeping an eye on how they're positioning their people. It's quite something. Oh, it's not just random intimidation. They've set up a smuggling network disguised as legitimate port operations. My surveillance feed caught Duke arriving in a new SUV, meeting with men in business suits near an abandoned warehouse. Their body language spoke of authority, corporate representatives, not street criminals. Rebecca's facial recognition software identified one as Victor Blackwood himself, CEO of BlackRock Industries. I got eyes on the real boss. I told Parker. Oh my, it looks like Blackwood's media is meeting with Duke in person. That's a bit of a security breach, isn't it? High-level executives usually don't meet directly with street operators. They're getting a bit careless, aren't they? Through her directional microphone, she caught fragments of conversation. She's trying to accelerate the timeline, but there are a few delays. She's trying to make examples of them if necessary. Oh dear, her police scanner crackled with urgent calls. There have been multiple reports of Death Riders attacking businesses along the waterfront. This is not their usual behavior. Intimidation, this was ordered violence. They're moving faster than expected. Rebecca noted that she was already heading for her motorcycle. Blackwood must be feeling pressure from someone above him. She arrived at Harborview Diner to find the windows shattered and the tables overturned. Lisa Martinez was sitting on the curb, bleeding from a cut above her eye while the paramedics treated her. Joey, her son, was pacing nearby, rage evident in every movement. Tell me, Rebecca said, kneeling beside Lisa. 6 of these aren't just your usual gang, Lisa. They're professionals, trained in military tactics. They said, glancing at Joey. They'll make sure we can't rebuild next time. Rebecca looked around at the damage. It was precise and calculated, not the chaotic vandalism of angry bikers. This was meant to send a message while causing specific, reparable damage. They want the business closed temporarily, not destroyed permanently. They hit Marco's too. Fishing Supply and Parker reported arriving on scene in Chen's Market, all businesses that unfortunately refused buyout offers from BlackRock's subsidiaries. This isn't just about property acquisition anymore, Rebecca realized. They're creating chaos to justify an increased security presence, which is understandable. Every incident lets them tighten control over the waterfront. Her phone buzzed with an anonymous text. Walk away. Major, some fights aren't worth dying for. They found your military background, which is pretty impressive. Parker noted reading the message. No, Rebecca corrected. They're showing me. They always knew. This isn't a warning. It's an invitation. They want me to understand. I'm dealing with people who have access to classified information. She spotted 2 Death Riders watching from a distance. They were making no effort to hide their surveillance. She photographed them. She added their details to her growing database. They're getting more aggressive, Parker. Rebecca replied, helping Lisa to her feet. She then told her that she had already made 3 critical mistakes. First, they had shown their corporate connections openly. Second, they had demonstrated access to classified intelligence. Third, she smiled grimly, they still think intimidation is their strongest weapon. Back at her operational center, Rebecca updated her network. The Death Riders were just the visible muscle, but behind them lay a complex web of corporate interests, corrupted officials, and international criminal connections. Each act of violence, each threat, and each show of force helped her understand the organization better. She even found something called BlackRock's development plan, which included a deep water port facility. Construction permits were fast-tracked. We've been keeping an eye on them for years now. Oh, there are some long delays, that's for sure. It seems like someone's greasing wheels at every level. Rebecca explained, connecting more threads on her map. They're building infrastructure for something bigger. The Death Riders provide muscle, corrupt officials, and clear bureaucratic obstacles. Black Rock provides legitimate cover for illegal operations. Her surveillance feeds showed more Death Riders arriving in the area. These weren't the usual street thugs, though. Their movements were disciplined and coordinated. They were former military or law enforcement professionals. She noted that things were escalating. From gang violence to paramilitary operations, it looks like we're close to something important. You almost sound glad they're getting more dangerous, Parker. I know, right? Professionals follow protocols, and Rebecca explained that protocols create patterns. Patterns can be predicted and exploited in counterintelligence. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one who acts randomly. It's the one who thinks they're too sophisticated to fail. Through her window, she spotted more motorcycles patrolling. The riders were conducting organized surveillance. The Death Riders thought they were tightening their control over Harbor View. Instead, they were revealing their entire command structure. The war for the waterfront wasn't entering a crucial phase. What had started as simple G intimidation had exposed a criminal conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of corporate and political power. But with each escalation, each show of force, each attempt at intimidation, they revealed more of their operation to someone trained to see the patterns behind the chaos. Major Rebecca Anderson was about to teach them why the deadliest predator isn't the one that shows its teeth. It's the one that studies its prey before striking. As night fell over Harbor View, Rebecca kept a close eye on things from her operations center. The Death Riders had transformed the waterfront into a highly secure zone. Professional security teams were on the job, patrolling, and looking out for any signs of trouble. They had some pretty sophisticated surveillance equipment scanning for threats. Unfortunately, some of the port officials were making things more difficult for the businesses that had been there for years. They were enforcing some pretty arbitrary security measures that just happened to disrupt legitimate businesses. They were getting reports of new players in town. Parker's voice crackled through their secure channel. These aren't your regular Death Riders. They're former Special Forces private military contractors. They're high. Rebecca confirmed that they're bringing in their professional teams, the end security specialists. She was watching the thermal signatures through her feeds and noticed their formation patterns, which looked like classic counterinsurgency tactics. It seemed like someone was deploying serious resources to secure this operation. Her facial recognition software pinged, identifying one of the new arrivals. It was Commander James Wilson, former Navy SEAL, who is now working for a private security firm. Rebecca told Parker that she'd found their tactical commander, who was with a security firm with connections to Black Rock Industry. She then pulled up Wilson's file and told Parker that he'd had multiple combat deployments and was specialized in maritime operations. After he'd been discharged, he'd worked in security consulting for several corporations, which were actually fronts for weapons trafficking. Rebecca then watched Wilson organizing the Death Riders into professional units. The bikers who had been causing trouble for local businesses were being replaced by a group of highly trained professionals conducting coordinated patrols. It's not just about having muscle power. Parker had received intelligence about massive equipment shipments arriving at the port. There was advanced surveillance gear, military-grade communications, and other sophisticated hardware. It's like they're building a forward operating base. She went on to explain that the waterfront development is so much more than just a real estate project. It's actually infrastructure for some pretty major illegal operations. They're turning Harbor View into a privately controlled port facility. Her scanner picked up encrypted communications, which meant that the Death Riders were now using military-grade radio protocols. But guess what? Rebecca had anticipated this, so her own systems were already breaking their codes. Codes were set up at all access points. Wilson's voice could be heard through their intercom. We've got full-spectrum surveillance coverage, so nothing moves without our authorization. Suddenly, multiple alerts lit up Rebecca's screens. The Death Riders' new security teams were conducting some pretty aggressive sweeps through the neighborhood, hitting businesses and stopping vehicles. They were also demanding identification from anyone in the area. Rebecca noted that they're mapping the community, watching the patterns emerge, identifying threats, establishing control points, and documenting anyone who might resist their operation. This is way beyond gang activity. Parker said, "We're talking about private military contractors running operations on our soil. How is this possible? They've got protection at every level." Rebecca replied, pulling up documentation, and said, "Look at. It's so interesting how things work out sometimes. These permits for BlackRock's development plans were approved by agencies that normally take years to process paperwork. Someone's got enough influence to turn Harbor View into a private security zone without raising official attention through her feeds." She watched Wilson meeting with Victor Blackwood at an upscale restaurant. The corporate executive was visibly agitated, gesturing at documents while the seal remained cold. Bly was professional. "They're accelerating their timeline," Rebecca observed. Blackwood seemed to be under pressure from someone above him. "The question is who has enough power to make a billion-dollar corporation rush its operations?" Her pattern recognition software flagged unusual financial movements, massive transfers through shell companies, property deals being rushed through with minimal oversight and legitimate transactions. It's so sad to see businesses being squeezed out through suddenly rigid security requirements. Parker called it just access Port Authority records. BlackRock's planned facility includes deep water berths, high-security storage areas, and private customs screening stations. It's so sad to see them building something that looks exactly like a private military port disguised as commercial development. Rebecca finished the Death Riders. It looks like the gang activity was just a phase. They were trying to clear out resistance and establish control. Now they're bringing in professionals to secure their real operation. I saw that on her other feeds, too. Wilson's teams were setting up some pretty sophisticated surveillance equipment around the waterfront. They've got cameras, motion sensors, signal interceptors, and more. They're creating a security bubble. Rebecca explained to Parker that they're doing total surveillance coverage. Controlled access points, dedicated reaction forces, classic military style, territorial control. It's a tough challenge. "How do we fight something like this?" Parker asked. "They've got trained operators, advanced equipment, and official cover for their operations. The same way I dismantled insurgent networks overseas," Rebecca replied, studying the patterns in their security coverage. "You don't match their strength, you turn it against them. Every system they install, every protocol they implement, every security measure they deploy becomes a vulnerability when properly exploited." Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The sender had an impressive background and could have a very profitable future in private security. "Consider this a professional courtesy. Walk away while you can." Rebecca smiled grimly. The Death Riders had started. This war thinking they were just dealing with a stubborn Marine, now they were realizing they faced someone who understood their tactics, their protocols, their entire operational methodology. "They're trying to buy you off," Parker noted, reading the message. "No," Rebecca corrected. "They're showing vulnerability. Professional operators don't make offers to potential threats, they eliminate them. This means someone in their organization is worried enough to try negotiation through her surveillance." The organization was worried enough to try negotiation through her surveillance. She watched Wilson's teams continuing to fortify the waterfront. They thought they were creating an impenetrable security zone, but they were actually building the perfect case study in private military operations on American soil. The war for Harbor View had entered a new phase. The Death Riders had evolved from drunk bikers to professionals. The military contractors were so sure of themselves, thinking their training and equipment made them invincible. They were about to learn why the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most sophisticated weapons. It's the one who knows how to turn those weapons against their users. Dawn crept over Harbor View, revealing the full extent of the Death Riders' transformation. The once peaceful waterfront had become a militarized zone with armed security teams are conducting regular patrols, and sophisticated surveillance equipment is monitoring every movement. Thermal imaging shows 12 new observation posts. Rebecca reported to Parker through their secure channel that they're establishing overlapping fields of view, which is great because it eliminates blind spots. Professional counter-surveillance protocols are in place, and her monitors showed Wilson's teams installing equipment worth millions. Security cameras, signal interceptors, motion sensors, hardware bought through shell companies, installations conducted under the cover of port security upgrades. It's all there in the latest communication protocols that Parker intercepted. It's clear that they're using military-grade encryption with rotating frequencies every hour, so someone's investing serious resources in this operation. Rebecca's facial recognition software even pinged new players arriving in. It's so interesting to see all these different people coming together. There are expensive SUVs, corporate executives, security consultants, and even a judge known for fast-tracking BlackRock permits. They're all meeting in what used to be Harborview's busiest restaurant, which is currently closed for renovation. It's like they're getting a bit too confident. Rebecca noted photographing each arrival, bringing their whole command structure to one location that's not protocol. That's desperation. Through her directional microphone, she caught fragments of heated discussion. Timelines have been compromised. It's so important that federal attention is accelerated. Suddenly, her surveillance feeds caught multiple Death Riders. The team was moving with urgent purpose, not the professional security contractors, but the original gang members, led by Duke himself. They're hitting businesses again. Parker reported through their secure line, but something's different. They're not just intimidating, they're searching for something. Rebecca watched through her tactical feeds as the Death Riders tore through shops along the waterfront. Their actions were precise, despite appearing random. They lost something, she realized. Something important enough to risk exposing their operation in daylight at Harborview Diner. Now operating from a food truck while repairing the damage from earlier attacks. Lisa Martinez served coffee to the morning crowd. Rebecca noticed her slip something to Joey, who quickly disappeared down an alley. He got eyes on the package. Rebecca told Parker, "Lisa's kid just made contact with our courier. You planted information for them to find." Parker realized, "Oh, you. They're using their own intimidation tactics against them. Classic counterintelligence." Just a few minutes later, with his professional teams, he looked at their response pattern. Rebecca pointed out that gang members conducted the search, while professionals secured the findings. Corporate representatives coordinated from a distance, and 3 distinct operational layers were exposed by one leaked document. Her surveillance picked up Wilson examining the papers, and his expression hardened. He immediately called for additional security teams, ordered new equipment installations, and tightened access controls. Access controls are being put in place to make sure that everything is safe and secure. Parker noticed that the documents really spooked them because now they know someone understands their operation. Rebecca explained that the documents detailed their planned shipping routes, security protocols, and most importantly, their true cargo. Her pattern recognition software flagged unusual movements in the ports, shipping records, cargo containers being rerouted, manifests altered in inspection. Schedules suddenly changed. Black Rock isn't just building a private port. Rebecca continued, they're creating an autonomous zone. This is a section of the American coastline that operates outside normal customs and security oversight. The Death Riders provide muscle, corrupt officials, clear bureaucratic obstacles, and corporate money makes it all look legitimate. Through her thermal imaging, she watched Wilson's teams installing even more sophisticated security measures. Military-grade motion sensors, signal jammers, even underwater detection systems. Grade motion sensors, signal jammers, even underwater detection systems. They're trying to plug leaks, but they're acting predictably. Professional operators following standard protocols exactly. Rebecca smiled. Predictable enemies are vulnerable. Every security measure they add, every protocol they implement, every reaction they make to perceived threats. It all helps us map their entire operation. Her phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Final warning. Major, walk away now or we demonstrate why. Professionals don't make threats, they take action. They're getting desperate. Parker warned. Professional contractors don't usually make explicit threats. Threats? Oh yes, Rebecca agreed they don't. That means we're close to something big enough to make them break operational protocol through her surveillance network. She watched the Death Riders operation continuing to evolve. Wilson's teams established new security perimeters while Duke's gang members conducted aggressive presence patrols through the neighborhood. Corporate representatives argued for more urgent meetings. Their usual careful discretion was replaced by visible concern. The war for Harborview was approaching a critical phase. The Death Riders had brought in professional military contractors, thinking their training and equipment made them invincible. Instead, Rebecca had created the perfect case study, which showed how sophisticated security measures can become vulnerabilities when facing someone who understands military protocols. Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why you never challenge a counterintelligence operative at their own game. Midnight cast long shadows across Harborview as Rebecca monitored Wilson's security teams conducting shift changes through her surveillance network. She noticed something odd. The professional contractors were being paired with original Death Riders members, mixing trained operators with street muscle. This was compromising their own security protocols. She told Parker over their encrypted channel, professional. It's not good practice for contractors to mix operational units with unreliable elements. It seems that someone is forcing Wilson to integrate the gang members. I've just received some interesting intel from my FBI contact. Duke has leverage over BlackRock. There's documentation of their early operations before they brought in the professionals. If he goes down, he'll take their whole corporate cover with him. Rebecca's facial recognition software flagged an unexpected arrival. Senator James Harrison, head of the State Maritime Commerce Committee, entering BlackRock's waterfront office at midnight. Now it makes sense. Rebecca noted, photographing the meeting. Harrison chairs the committee overseeing Port Authority regulations. 3 weeks ago, he fast. She followed the debate on reducing the oversight of private maritime facilities with her directional microphone and heard some heated words between Harrison and Blackwood. She promised that this would be kept under control and that it wouldn't affect the whole country. After all, they're not just worried about the local police anymore. Parker realized that this was a bigger issue because they're not just building a private port. Rebecca showed her the plans and said, "Look at this. These design specifications are pretty impressive. They're creating an autonomous zone, a section of American coastline operating outside normal oversight." Her surveillance needs caught Duke arriving at the meeting, swaggering past professional security with the confidence of someone holding powerful leverage. The gang leader has evolved from simple muscle to a critical player in the organization. It's so interesting to see how power shifts. Wilson had brought in professionals to help, but it seems that Duke's gang has become too valuable to eliminate. After all, they control the streets. Parker added that all that corporate money and political influence doesn't help if you can't control the territory physically. So, Rebecca's pattern recognition software flagged multiple alerts. It seems that the Death Riders were mobilizing, not just the professional teams, but every single one. Rebecca noted that they were able to muster a full operational deployment. She observed that Wilson's teams were establishing a perimeter, while Duke's people conducted an aggressive sweep. They were looking for something specific through her feeds. She watched the Death Riders tear through the neighborhood. Their search pattern revealed military precision despite their chaotic appearance. This wasn't random intimidation, it was a coordinated operation. They found OMI, the transmitter that Parker reported on so urgently. The one we planted in their last shipment has been found. It's obvious that someone's been tracking their movements. Rebecca smiled grimly as she watched their reaction pattern. The Death Riders' response was immediate and revealing. While Wilson's professional contractors established communications blackout protocols, Duke's gang members conducted physical searches. Corporate representatives arrived in expensive cars, coordinating with. Rebecca explained that there are 3 distinct operational layers. It was so interesting to see how they all fit together. The professionals follow military protocols, the gang provides street-level muscle, and the corporate side manages official cover. Her thermal imaging showed Wilson meeting with Duke. Their body language was so interesting. It seemed like there was unusual tension between the professional operator and the unreliable street thugs, but someone higher up was forcing the cooperation, which was a bit of a problem. Their own security structure is becoming a vulnerability, Rebecca noted. Wilson's teams can't operate effectively while babysitting gang members, and Duke's people resist professional protocols, which is a shame. They're compromising their own operational security through her surveillance, which is a bit of a worry. She watched Senator Harris leaving the BlackRock office visibly shaken, poor thing. Her financial tracking software flagged unusual transactions, which was a bit of a shock. Large sums of money are moving through offshore accounts and political action committees are receiving unexpected donations. They're trying to contain potential fallout because they know we're close to exposing something bigger than a criminal operation. Rebecca replied, "This isn't just about smuggling or corruption anymore. They're creating an INF structure for something that requires political protection at the highest levels." Her phone buzzed. Wilson was calling her directly, breaking his own security protocols. "You've got skills, Major, but you're interfering with something bigger than you understand. It's your last chance to walk away clean and get out of this alive. Commander Rebecca out. Thankfully, professional contractors like me don't have to deal with direct threats. It's so sad when someone gets upset enough to break operational security through their social media feeds. I saw how the Death Riders were continuing to evolve their operation. Wilson's teams were fortifying their positions with military precision, while Duke's gang members were conducting increasingly aggressive patrols. Corporate representatives arrived for urgent meetings. They were so worried about Harbor View. The war was entering its most dangerous phase. The Death Riders had tried to evolve from street gang to professional military contractor, but their own organizational structure was becoming their greatest weakness. They were about to find out why mixing professional operators with undisciplined thugs creates vulnerabilities that no amount of sophisticated equipment can protect against. Major Rebecca Anderson was preparing to exploit every one of those vulnerabilities. The situation at Harborview took an unexpected turn when Rebecca's surveillance picked up unusual activity at the port's supposedly abandoned maintenance facility. Through her thermal imaging, she detected a pattern of late-night meetings involving high-level corporate executives and international visitors. She also noticed movement on the East Dock. She reported to Parker, "There are diplomatic vehicles and private security here." It wasn't the usual suspects. Parker got wind of 3 ships scheduled to dock next week, with manifests listing agricultural equipment. But the security protocols are military-grade. Rebecca's facial recognition software identified one of the visitors as Adrian Kovac, a known arms dealer operating under diplomatic cover. Her intelligence training immediately recognized the implications. It wasn't just a smuggling operation. She realized that Harborview is becoming an international weapons distribution hub. There's more to it than meets the eye. The real estate development, the port security upgrades, the political protection. It's all infrastructure. For arms trafficking, she watched co-meeting with both Wilson and Blackwood. The arms dealer's presence explained the increasing sophistication of their operation. He was providing not just connections but professional expertise, according to DEA archives. Parker added that Kovac specializes in mixing legitimate shipping operations with illegal cargo. He's known for corrupting entire ports, turning them into private trafficking zones. Suddenly, Rebecca's monitoring systems detected a massive surge in encrypted communications. The Death Riders' entire command structure was mobilizing, but something was different. The professional contractors weren't just. It was so interesting to see how they were coordinating with gang members and receiving orders from them. Power's shift was really interesting, and it was great to see how Duke wasn't just muscle anymore. He'd become CAC's direct contact for local operations. It's so fascinating to see how the professionals have to work through gang hierarchies now. And her surveillance caught Duke strutting through the port facility, which was formerly restricted to Wilson's. So exciting. Teams, the gang leader had evolved from a street thug to international arms dealers. "Lieutenant, pull up everything we have on Duke's military background." Rebecca instructed Parker. His dishonorable discharge might not be what it seems. Parker replied, "I found sealed records." He wasn't just force recon. He worked specialized operations. Duke's gang had even been involved in weapons interdiction in Eastern Europe. It all started to make sense. Duke's gang hadn't randomly chosen Harborview. No, they'd planned this for years. The Death Riders had established street control, while corporate allies created legitimate cover through thermal imaging. Rebecca watched specialized equipment being installed throughout the port. It wasn't just security measures, but sophisticated cargo handling systems disguised as routine upgrades. She told Parker, "They're preparing for major shipments." She pointed out the increased security, the rush to control territory, the political pressure, and the racing to meet deadlines. For international buyers, her pattern recognition software flagged anomalies, and Port Authority records showed that certain cargo containers were being marked for expedited processing. This designation bypassed normal inspection protocols. Parker sent her internal communications from BlackRock. He reported that they're calling it Project Phoenix. Complete privatization of port operations under corporate security oversight. If this goes through, they'll have a sovereign zone for international shipping. Rebecca's tactical display showed the operation's true scope. The Death Riders weren't just gang members playing it safe. They were specialized operators establishing military-grade logistics infrastructure under civilian cover. Grade the logistics infrastructure under civilian cover. This changes everything, she noted, updating her operational plans. We're not just fighting street criminals or corrupt officials. We're dealing with an international weapons trafficking network that's compromised an entire American port. She watched Wilson's teams conducting specialized training exercises, now clearly following Duke's directions. The professional contractor's irritation was visible, but CAC's presence had rewritten the chain of command. "They think they're secure," Rebecca explained to Parker. "International connections, political protection, professional security. They've created something too complex to control. Bless them." Her phone buzzed with an alert. Kovac was requesting a meeting through intermediaries. The arms dealer had recognized a worthy opponent and was offering negotiation. He wants to talk. Parker warned these people don't negotiate unless they're ready to eliminate problems. Exactly, Rebecca replied, already adjusting her strategy. That means we've got them worried enough to break their own protocols. Time to show them why you never invite a hello. I'm a counterintelligence operative. I'm here to expose your operation. The war for Harbor View has entered a new dimension. What started as local gang intimidation has revealed an international arms trafficking network. But in their rush to establish sophisticated infrastructure, they've created vulnerabilities that someone with military intelligence training could exploit. Major Rebecca Anderson is about to demonstrate why the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most weapons. It's the one who knows how to turn an entire weapons trafficking operation against itself. A meeting had been set, and Rebecca's counterintelligence instincts were on high alert. The arms dealer had chosen Harborview Diner, now reopened after repairs, as the meeting point. It was a calculated move meant to demonstrate his control over local territory. There were 3 sniper positions on surrounding rooftops, Rebecca noted to Parker through their secure channel. They were conducting pre-ticking surveillance. Wilson's teams were providing overwatch. Death Riders were handling ground security. They were just taking no chances. They'd just intercepted Port Authority alerts. Oh my, Parker replied. 4 cargo ships have been diverted from their scheduled routes. They're all heading here. To Harbor View, whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Rebecca entered the diner precisely on time, noting how other customers were clearly Kovac people, professional operators disguised as civilians. Lisa Martinez served coffee with trembling hands, understanding the tension beneath the seemingly normal scene. Kovac sat alone in a corner booth, his expensive suit and refined manner contrasting sharply with the diner's humble setting. Major Anderson smiled, gesturing to the seat opposite him. I believe we have mutual interest to discuss. An interesting choice of location, Rebecca. I replied, noting Duke watching intently from the counter. He was using civilian businesses as cover for operational meetings, which was standard arms trafficking protocol. Kovac's smile tightened slightly. Direct, he said. Aren't we very well? You've caused my organization significant inconvenience, but you've also demonstrated impressive capabilities. We could really use someone with your expertise, through her concealed earpiece. Rebecca heard Parker tracking multiple death squads. She knew that units were converging on the area. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a show of force. Let me guess, she responded, maintaining eye contact with him. Kovac, you're offering a position in your security structure, probably alongside Wilson's teams, helping maintain your legitimate port operations. It's a great opportunity. You understand both military logistics and criminal enterprises. Someone needs to coordinate between our professional contractors and local assets. Duke's people respect strength, and they'd follow a decorated Marine like you anywhere. Rebecca's tactical awareness noted subtle changes in the diner. More customers are arriving, all with concealed weapons and communications equipment. They were sealing the building. You're not just trafficking. Weapons, she stated, watching Kovac's reaction. Harbor View is becoming a sovereign port, completely independent from federal oversight. The Death Riders provide muscle, BlackRock creates corporate cover, and you supply international connections. Very good, Kovac nodded appreciatively. Not many people see the full picture so clearly, which is why this conversation is happening. Join us and you'll be rewarded very well. Refuse and I'll become a problem that needs solving. Rebecca finished, but you've overlooked something crucial. Oh, Cac's amusement carried a dangerous edge. You think this meeting is about negotiating Rebecca explained calmly. It's actually about documenting your entire command structure. Cac's confusion was evident for a moment before chaos erupted outside. Federal tactical teams descended on the sniper positions while DEA strike forces intercepted Death Riders units throughout the neighborhood. Oh, this neighborhood is quite interesting, Rebecca noted, her professional demeanor cracking ever so slightly. It seemed as though someone had known her entire security pattern and exploited it through her earpiece. She heard Parker coordinating the operation, with 6 suspects in custody at the port, accessing BlackRock's mainframe and intercepting armed shipments. You have no idea what you've done, Kovac, he said, his voice calm but firm. The people I work for are already being exposed. Rebecca, I'm so sorry, but every ship approaching Harbor View has been flagged for international inspection. BlackRock's accounts are frozen pending investigation, and your pet gang is being dismantled piece by piece. Duke moved to intervene, but Rebecca's raised hand stopped him. Remember your real training, she said quietly. This isn't about gang violence anymore. Your entire weapons trafficking operation is compromised. Outside, more federal units arrived as Wilson's professional contractors surrendered. Rebecca could see that the Death Riders' attempt to evolve from street gang to international arms dealer had collapsed. She asked Kovac as federal agents entered the diner why they maintained the gang violence. She suggested that maybe they should run everything through professional contractors because fear is more effective than efficiency. Kovac replied bitterly that professional security maintains order, but street terror keeps people from asking questions. As agents took Kovac into custody, Rebecca watched the Death Riders' sophisticated operation crumbling. She saw that their attempt to mix professional military contractors with street-level intimidation had failed. The war for Harborview hadn't been won with guns or badges. It had been won with intelligence, patience, and the understanding that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise becomes vulnerable when it underestimates its opponents. Major Rebecca Anderson had just shown them why you never invite a counterintelligence operative to analyze your operation unless you're ready for it to be dismantled from within. The aftermath of KAC's arrest transformed Harborview into a storm of federal activity. Rebecca watched from her surveillance center. As multiple agencies descended on the waterfront, the FBI teams were securing evidence, the DEA agents were tracking international connections, and the Treasury officials were freezing suspicious accounts. The final numbers were coming in, and Parker reported through their secure Channel 17 that Death Riders in custody included Duke and his core team. Wilson's security contractors were cooperating and turning over documentation of the entire weapons operation. BlackRock's offices were being raided coast to coast. What about political connections? Rebecca asked, monitoring reaction patterns through her surveillance network. She wanted to know what would happen if an international arms dealer were arrested. In response to this, Senator Harrison had a bit of a health emergency and jetted off to Switzerland. Parker replied that 3 federal judges had suddenly stepped down from cases involving maritime commerce. Port Authority officials were literally fighting each other to make deals. Rebecca's facial recognition software tracked multiple corporate executives attempting to flee the area through her thermal imaging. She watched BlackRock's security teams destroying documents while lawyers arrived in expensive cars. They're trying to contain the damage, but they don't understand that they're not doing a very good job. Oh, it was so sad to see CAC arrested. It wasn't the end of the operation, though. It was the start of something big. Her pattern recognition software flagged unusual financial movements, massive transfers being blocked, accounts frozen, property assets seized, and the sophisticated infrastructure the Death Riders had helped build was becoming evidence of international weapons trafficking. Oh my! It was so interesting. Parker called accessing Wilson and secured files. The Death Riders weren't just providing muscle, they were testing security protocols. Duke's military background wasn't a coincidence. He was evaluating Harborview's potential as a weapons hub. Rebecca watched the federal team's progress with interest via her feeds. They were making great strides. They discovered hidden caches throughout the waterfront, sophisticated weapons concealed in legitimate cargo, military-grade equipment disguised as construction materials, and secure communications centers built into abandoned buildings. The gang violence was calculated, Rebecca explained. They were connecting more pieces of the puzzle, creating enough local chaos to justify extreme security measures and making the community too afraid to question strange shipments or unusual activities. Her surveillance caught Lisa Martinez talking with federal agents, finally free to share what she'd discovered. Other business owners came forward too, and shared their experiences of the Death Riders' systematic takeover of Harborview. They told us that multiple shipping containers had been seized, and that the manifests listed agricultural equipment. But they also found weapon components, specialized electronics, and custom modification kits. It was clear that Harborview wasn't just going to be a trafficking route. Rebecca studied port blueprints, and it became obvious that they were building a complete weapons processing facility. Import components through legitimate channels, assemble them in secured areas, then export as manufacturing equipment. Rebecca suddenly noticed that her system was flagging multiple approaching vehicles. She quickly realized that these weren't federal agents, but private security teams and professional contractors working for someone above Kovac. They were coming to clean up loose ends, and were new players entering the field. Rebecca immediately alerted Parker, saying, "These aren't Wilson's people. They're probably direct assets of whoever Kovac really works for." She then alerted the federal teams, saying, "They're here to eliminate evidence through her tactical feeds." She tracked the new operators and established that they were in positions around Harborview. Their movements showed advanced training far beyond that of Wilson's contractors. These were apex predators of the private military world. It seems that there are other predators of the private military world getting reports of similar teams at other ports. Parker added that there are synchronized operations targeting anything connected to Casey's network. It seems that someone is trying to erase an entire weapons trafficking infrastructure. Rebecca's surveillance caught the new contractors accessing secure areas with high-level clearance codes and authorization that shouldn't exist after the federal seizure. They moved with precise coordination and systematically eliminated traces of the true operation. They're not just destroying evidence. Rebecca realized, watching patterns emerge, that they're activating contingency protocols at Harborview. It was just one piece of a larger network taking down Kovac, but it did expose part of the operation. The real power structure is still hidden, though. Her tactical display showed the contractors' methodical progress. They accessed hidden servers, erased security logs, and removed specialized equipment that even the federal teams hadn't discovered yet. Their efficiency proved they'd trained specifically for this type of cleanup operation. Multiple federal agents reported system failures. Parker warned that their secured evidence is being wiped remotely. Even seized documents are disappearing from secured facilities, because this was never just about weapons. Rebecca explained her military intelligence training, recognizing the larger pattern. Harborview was a test site proving they could turn an American port into a private operation. If it worked here, they could replicate it anywhere. Parker finished, using the same template to compromise ports nationwide. The Death Riders, BlackRock, Kovac, they were all just part of the trial run. Rebecca watched the cleanup teams finishing their work. They moved like ghosts, leaving no trace of their presence while systematically erasing evidence of the larger conspiracy. Federal agents would find their work. It's so strange. All of the documents that they've seized have been corrupted on their secured servers. It's as if they've wiped their evidence chain and it's now beyond repair. I'm just trying to be thorough, you know? I'm monitoring multiple data streams, but they don't realize that everything they're doing is proving the existence of an organization powerful enough to override federal security and eliminate evidence at will. Their cleanup operation is generating more evidence than Kovac. My phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted source. I'm doing such impressive work, but I've only scratched the surface. Some operations are too big to expose. I think you should walk away while you still can. They're trying to scare you, Parker. These aren't just some random thugs or corporate criminals. These people are at a level where problems just disappear, permanently. Rebecca corrected, already adapting her strategy. They're showing us what they really care about. Every system they try to erase, every document they destroy, trace them, eliminate it all, and we'll understand what they're really protecting in counterintelligence. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from analyzing what the enemy tries hardest to hide. The war for Harborview had evolved beyond a local conflict. What started as gang intimidation had exposed an international weapons operation, which in turn revealed a shadow organization capable of manipulating federal agencies at will. The Death Riders had been just the visible muscle for something far more dangerous and major. Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why trying to eliminate sometimes evidence is the strongest proof of all. Rebecca had to speed up her timeline through her surveillance network because the cleanup team's arrival forced her to do so. She tracked their methodical progress through Harborview, noting how federal agents seemed oblivious to their presence despite their obvious activities. They're using classified access codes, Parker reported, monitoring multiple security breaches. They're not just seeing federal breaches, they're seeing military, diplomatic credentials, and even intelligence service protocols. This isn't just a criminal organization, Rebecca explained. It's a bigger operation. Let me tell you something interesting. These are private contractors working for something bigger. Look at their operational patterns. They're trained in governmental-level security procedures. Her facial recognition software flagged one of the team leaders, former CIA operations specialist Thomas Green. He's now working for a private security firm with no public profile, but extensive government contracts. He found something in Wilson's encrypted files. Parker added before. The Death Riders before BlackRock Harborview were flagged for strategic infrastructure development by a classified Department of Defense initiative. It's possible that the whole criminal operation was actually a cover for something official. Rebecca's tactical display showed the cleanup teams accessing areas that even federal agents hadn't discovered. They moved with the confidence of people used to operating above normal law enforcement jurisdiction. Pull up satellite imagery from 6 months ago. Rebecca asked her team to compare port modifications with standard military logistics requirements. The analysis confirmed her suspicions. Every renovation, every security upgrade, every infrastructure change matched Department of Defense specifications for covert operating bases. They weren't just building a weapons trafficking hub, Rebecca realized. They were establishing a black site disguised as a criminal enterprise. The security team at Black Rock had a good reason to be concerned about visible threats. Casey's operation was a great way to hide the real purpose. Thanks to her thermal imaging, Rebecca could see Green's teams accessing hidden facilities beneath abandoned warehouses. The infrastructure they revealed was far more sophisticated than anything needed for weapons smuggling. Parker noted energy signatures that don't match anything in civilian databases. Databases, whatever they're removing, it's highly classified technology. Rebecca's surveillance caught Green making a secure call. His expression showed rare concern through her directional microphone. She caught fragments of containment compromised and need to accelerate Phase 2. There were also mentions of civilian complications in Phase 2. Parker questioned Harbor View. Was Phase 1? Rebecca explained that the patterns were clicking into place. They could prove they could establish covert infrastructure inside. It's so sad. Those poor civilian ports are using criminal enterprises as cover, corrupt officials for protection, and professional contractors for security. Her pattern recognition software flagged similar operations being initiated at ports across the country. The same combination of gang activity, corporate development, and private security deployment. It's so worrying. They're not trying to hide evidence anymore. Rebecca noted, watching Green's teams, they're salvaging what they can before activating. Backup sites, this was always meant to be disposable, a test run for something larger. Suddenly, her systems detected massive data surges. The cleanup teams weren't just removing physical evidence, they were uploading huge amounts of information through secured channels. They were using our own surveillance against us. Rebecca realized that every camera we had compromised, every communication we had intercepted, they were tracking our entire investigation through our own. Monitoring systems, that's impossible, Parker protested. Our security protocols were exactly what they wanted to test. Rebecca finished. See how sophisticated civilian opposition could get. What resources we'd deploy. Which tactics we'd use. It's so sad. They're erasing all the evidence of the criminal enterprise and the classified infrastructure beneath it. And it's not just one or two agencies, it's multiple federal agencies. The reporting system failures are so worrying. And Parker warned us about the evidence databases being corrupted, witness statements missing, and even video surveillance erased. It's not just a cleanup operation. They're trying to get rid of the official record of its existence. And Rebecca's tax ICL display showed similar patterns at other ports. It's not just one isolated incident. It's a simultaneous cleanup operation, getting rid of. Even the traces of connected infrastructure that the Death Riders' territory had been just one node in a nationwide network are being erased. Parker observed that it's as if none of this ever happened. Rebecca corrected her, saying that they're already adapting their strategy. They're proving they can make anything disappear. This isn't about cleaning up one operation. It's about demonstrating power and showing they can override federal authority and manipulate official records. Get rid of the evidence whenever you want. Her phone buzzed with another encrypted message. You've served your purpose. The experiment is concluded. It's time to forget what you've seen. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Parker warned that's a direct threat because they think they're untouchable. Rebecca replied, studying the cleanup team's movements. They're operating at a level where normal laws don't apply, but they've made a critical mistake. What is it? What have they revealed? Rebecca explained that they overrode every system, erased every record, and eliminated every trace. It all proves that someone has the power to manipulate reality at this scale. In counterintelligence, sometimes the biggest threat isn't what you can prove exists, but what you can prove has been deliberately hidden. The war for Harbor View had transcended criminal investigation. What started as gang intimidation had exposed not just international, but also classified operations testing the limits of civilian resistance. The Death Riders had been pawns in a game played at levels they couldn't imagine. Major Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why trying to erase reality sometimes proves its existence more definitively than any evidence could. Rebecca's surveillance network captured a new development at midnight: unmarked military helicopters landing at the port. Weapons trafficking is just one part of a much bigger picture. It's a classified operation, testing the limits of civilian resistance. The Death Riders had been caught up in a game played at levels they couldn't even imagine. Major Rebecca Anderson is about to show them why trying to erase reality sometimes proves its existence more definitively than any evidence could. Rebecca's surveillance network captured a new development at midnight: unmarked military helicopters landing at the port. Thermal signature matching classified transport protocols through her feeds, she watched elite teams deploying with equipment far beyond anything the cleanup crews carried. These aren't contractors anymore, she told Parker through their secure channel. These are active military units operating under civilian cover. Look at their formation patterns. Special Operations Protocols just intercepted new orders at the federal level. The investigation has been officially closed due to national security concerns, so it looks like it's time to wrap things up. Rebecca's facial recognition software identified the operations commander, Colonel James Hunt, whose official record ended 5 years ago when he retired to join a classified program. Cross-referencing Hunt's last known operations, the pattern Hunt had a knack for setting up hidden bases in civilian ports all over the globe. He'd partner with local gangs to help him hide his operations. Harbor View wasn't the only place he'd done this. As he and his team swept the area, it became clear that they could easily replicate their foreign operations right here in the U.S. They'd use things like public unrest to justify their actions, corporate development to hide their tracks, and weapons trafficking to mask their military operations. Grade logistics through her thermal imaging, and she tracked the teams accessing previously unknown facilities beneath the port. The infrastructure they revealed made Kovacs' weapons operation look primitive by comparison. Getting energy readings off the charts, Parker reported that whatever they're moving down there is beyond anything in civilian databases. Even military records show nothing like this. Rebecca's thankfully, the surveillance caught Hunt coordinating with Green's cleanup teams. Their interaction revealed a clear chain of command, which was great news. It meant that they weren't just about eliminating evidence anymore. They were extracting something critically important. The Death Riders BlackRock Kovac, they were all expendable. Rebecca realized that their criminal enterprise had created the perfect distraction while we focused on weapons trafficking. The real operation was happening underground. Her pattern recognition software flagged similar activities at ports across the country. It was the same combination of criminal takeover, corporate development, and covert military presence. They're not just testing port infiltration. Rebecca noted, analyzing the data, that they're creating a parallel infrastructure inside civilian facilities, hidden bases, secure transport routes, and classified sites. All of a sudden, her systems picked up on something really strange going on beneath the port. It seemed like the military teams were activating something that made her most sensitive equipment malfunction. The energy signature just went exponential. I.L. Parker warned that whatever they're powering up down there is like nothing we've seen before. Through her remaining functional feeds, Rebecca watched Hunt's teams preparing for some kind of extraction. Their movements showed urgency, not the calculated efficiency of standard cleanup operations. It seemed like they were removing evidence, but Rebecca explained that she was picking up on patterns that clicked into place. The place they're relocating something is so interesting. Harbor View wasn't just a test site, it was housing prototype technology. They developed it using the cover of the criminal enterprise. Her surveillance caught Hunt making a secured call. Package prep complete. Civilian exposure contained. Ready for Protocol Omega. Omega. Parker questioned total infrastructure elimination. Rebecca replied, recognizing military terminology. They're not just going to clean up evidence, they're going to erase Harbor View completely. Make it look like an industrial accident. Probably something involving BlackRock's development project. Through her feeds, she saw it all. She watched as specialized teams placed charges throughout the port's underground facilities. These weren't normal explosives. They carried warning symbols she'd never seen before. Multiple federal agencies were being evacuated, Parker reported urgently. The Coast Guard was establishing a maritime exclusion zone, and even local police were being pulled back without explanation. Rebecca's tactical display showed a carefully choreographed operation unfolding while Hunt's teams extracted their classified technology. Green's contractors continued eliminating evidence of both criminal and military activities. They're going to trigger a cascading infrastructure collapse. Rebecca explained that, based on their placement patterns, it looks like the old port facilities failed catastrophically. BlackRock is taking the blame for rushed development. Insurance is covering civilian losses, and everyone is accepting the official story. Her phone buzzed with a final encrypted message. The experiment concluded successfully, and they documented civilian resistance capabilities. Thank you for your unwitting participation. Major, they're not even hiding their involvement anymore. Parker noted that they want you to know you've been part of their test, because they think it doesn't matter. Rebecca replied, I'm already implementing. They think that because they can erase evidence, they're untouchable. But they've overlooked something crucial. What is it? Well, it's this. The more completely they erase something, the more definitively they prove it existed. Every record they eliminate, every witness they silence, every trace they erase, it all demonstrates that someone has the power to alter reality on this scale. And that proof is impossible to hide. The war for Harbor View had evolved beyond anything the Death Riders could have imagined. Their attempt to control a local port had exposed an operation testing the limits of civilian infrastructure. Infiltration, but in their rush to eliminate evidence, the true powers behind it had revealed something far more significant and major. Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why trying to erase reality sometimes creates the strongest proof of all. With Protocol Omega initiated, Rebecca had minutes to implement her counter-strategy through her surveillance network. She tracked Hunt's teams making final preparations while mysterious energy signatures continued building beneath the port. She told Parker urgently, whatever they're extracting down there, it's affecting their equipment. Their military-grade tech is showing interference patterns. I've just heard from my FBI contact, Parker, who's been keeping an eye on things. He's picked up similar energy signatures at 3 other ports across the country, all of which line up with Death Riders territory. It's been a pretty wild year with a lot going on. Rebecca's tactical display showed the full scope of what they'd uncovered. Harbor View wasn't the only one. It was just one node in a network of covert research sites that had been disguised as criminal enterprises, gang warfare, weapons trafficking, and corporate development. It was all just cover. Rebecca explained, watching Hunt's teams rush to extract classified technology that they needed to test. While developing something too sensitive for normal military bases, she noticed teams moving what appeared to be containment units from underground facilities. The equipment around them showed signs of unusual stress, electrical anomalies, signal disruptions, and even localized gravitational inconsistencies. Parker reported that whatever's in those containers violates known physics. Even classified military research doesn't account for these energy patterns. Rebecca's surveillance caught Hunt coordinating with someone through quantum, encrypted channels of communication technology that officially didn't exist yet. His expression showed growing concern as the energy signatures continued intensifying. They're losing containment. Rebecca realized, recognizing patterns from her military intelligence experience, that the technology they're testing is becoming unstable. That's why they're rushing Protocol Omega. They need to eliminate all evidence before they lose control. Her pattern recognition software flagged similar energy buildups at other ports across the country. The entire network was being affected by whatever they developed. Multiple federal agencies were reporting. Oh my goodness, there's been a lot going on. Parker warned that communication systems are crashing, satellites are malfunctioning, and power grids are showing unexplained surges. It's pretty intense. Rebecca watched Hunt's teams frantically working to stabilize their containment units. The sophisticated cleanup operation had transformed into desperate damage control. They thought they could control it, but it looks like they created something they can't. Containment suddenly became an issue as her systems detected a massive power spike beneath the energy signature, which was unlike anything in known physics. It was a reality-warping phenomenon that defied conventional understanding. All teams were evacuating, so Parker reported urgently that they were abandoning equipment and leaving evidence. Something forced them to break protocol completely. Rebecca's tactical display showed chaos erupting across Harbor View. Hunt's elite team scrambled to escape, while Green's contractors desperately tried to complete their cleanup operation. The carefully coordinated military precision had dissolved into pure survival instinct. This isn't what they're used to, Rebecca explained, watching the situation deteriorate. Whatever they develop down there is affecting the fundamental structure of reality around it. Protocol Omega, isn't just about erasing their operation. They're trying to prevent something much worse. Her surveillance caught Hunt making a final transmission. Containment failing. Reality fabric compromised. Initiate scorched earth. No witnesses. Parker realized that not just the port, but the entire Harborview district was going to be destroyed. Rebecca corrected her, saying that she was already implementing her contingency plan. They're going to try, but they've overlooked something crucial about reality. The harder you try to erase it, the more permanent the evidence becomes. Through her feeds, she watched reality itself beginning to warp around the port, space and time showing visible distortions. She saw effects that should have been impossible. The Death Riders' territory had become ground zero for something that threatened the very fabric of existence. Multiple reality breaches had been detected. Parker reported, her voice shaking. Whatever they were developing, it's not just affecting the port. It's affecting the entire Harborview district. Something crucial about reality. The harder you try to erase it, the more permanent the evidence becomes. Through her feeds, she watched reality itself beginning to warp around the port. Space and time showed visible distortions, creating effects that should have been impossible. The Death Riders' territory had become ground zero for something that threatened the very fabric of existence. Multiple reality breaches had been detected. Parker reported, her voice shaking. Whatever they were developing, it's not just affecting our world anymore. It's creating doorways to somewhere else. Rebecca's military intelligence training had never prepared her for this. For this level of crisis, the war for Harborview had evolved beyond gang violence, beyond weapons trafficking, beyond even classified military research. They'd stumbled onto something that challenged the fundamental laws of the universe. They thought they could play with forces they didn't understand. Rebecca noted grimly, using criminal enterprises to hide their experiments, corporate power to protect their secrets, and military might to control the consequences. But some things can't be controlled. They can only be contained. The final phase of the war for Harborview was beginning. What started as drunk bikers harassing a Marine had exposed an operation that threatened reality itself. Major Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why. Marine had uncovered an operation that posed a serious threat to reality itself. Major Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why trying to erase existence sometimes releases forces that no power on Earth can stop. As Rebecca implemented her counter-strategy, the reality distortions around Harborview intensified. Years of military intelligence experience had taught her that even the most powerful organizations had vulnerabilities. Right now, their desperate attempt to contain their failed experiment was exposing every weakness. Multiple reality breaches were expanding, Parker reported through their increasingly unstable communication channel. The energy signature is affecting everything, even digital systems, physical infrastructure, and temporal stability. It's a bit of a pickle. Rebecca's surveillance network, designed for conventional monitoring, captured some pretty wild images. Spaces were folding in on themselves, time was flowing at different rates in adjacent areas, and objects were existing in multiple states simultaneously. They didn't just develop new technology either. Rebecca explained that they were analyzing the patterns in the chaos and created something that affects the fundamental forces holding reality together. The Death Riders' territory became their testing ground because they needed to understand how it would affect civilian infrastructure. She used what was left of her thermal imaging to track Hunt's teams, who were struggling to maintain containment. Their military-grade equipment, designed for conventional warfare, proved useless against phenomena that defied physical laws. Parker added similar reality breaches that had appeared nationwide. Whatever they developed here, it's spreading through their entire network. Rebecca's pattern recognition software identified a crucial detail before failing completely. The distortions followed the exact expansion pattern of the Death Riders. Over the past year, it became clear to her that the gang warfare wasn't random. Every territory they took over, every business they threatened, every area they controlled, it was all preparation. They were mapping how their experiment would affect different types of civilian infrastructure. Her tactical display showed the full scope of their operation. Then, the Death Riders started shorting out. They hadn't just been a gang. They were unwitting cartographers of reality, manipulation testing how different areas would respond to fundamental changes in physical laws. Hunt's team is attempting full containment protocols. Parker reported urgently that they're going to try to seal the breaches by removing the affected areas from our reality completely through the visual distortions. Rebecca watched specialized teams deploying equipment that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Their desperate attempt to contain their failed experiment threatened to erase entire sections of Harborview. From the fabric of reality itself, they think they can control it, Rebecca noted, recognizing the fatal flaw in their strategy. They thought they could use military force to contain something that affects the very nature of existence. But they don't understand that you can't fight reality with conventional weapons suddenly. Her remaining systems picked up on something really worrying: a massive surge in temporal energy. It wasn't just that the containment protocols weren't working, they were actually accelerating the breakdown of normal physics throughout the whole area. "We've got multiple timeline convergences detected," and Parker warned, her voice distorting across seemingly different versions of reality. "The barriers between possible worlds are collapsing," he said. "We're seeing versions of Harborview from different histories starting to overlap." Thankfully, Rebecca's military intelligence training proved crucial as she analyzed the patterns in the chaos through the reality distortions. She watched various versions of the Death Riders. Territory intersecting. They succeeded in taking control in some places, failed in others, and in some places they never existed at all. They tried to play with forces beyond their understanding. Rebecca explained her final strategy, which involved using criminal enterprises to test reality manipulation, corporate power to hide their experiments, and military might to control the consequences. However, they forgot something fundamental about existence. What was that? Parker's voice echoed across multiple temporal variations. "Reality isn't something you can fight," Rebecca replied, watching Hunt's teams realize the same truth. "It's not about power or control or military force. Reality is what remains when all attempts to change it fail, through the chaos of overlapping timelines." She watched the Death Riders' carefully constructed operation crumbling, their sophisticated security measures proving meaningless against forces that ignored physical laws. Their corporate cover stories collapsed as multiple versions of truth converged. Their military might meant nothing when reality itself refused to obey normal rules. Hunt's initiating final containment. Parker reported, her words seeming to exist in several moments simultaneously. "They're going to try to seal everything up and seal the breaches in the affected areas, even in their own team's total reality quarantine. They still don't understand," Rebecca noted with a little smile. "You can't quarantine existence because every attempt to contain it just creates more evidence of what they're trying to hide. The harder they try to erase what they've done, the more proof there is, the more it seems like the war for Harborview has gone beyond what we usually think of as war. What started as some drunk bikers harassing a Marine has shown us that there's something going on that could change the very nature of reality. Major Rebecca Anderson is about to show us all why it's so important to fight for what we believe in." As reality kept on fracturing around Harborview, lots of different versions of the truth started to come together. Each timeline showed different things, like different versions of events and different possibilities. But they all led to this moment of crisis. They wanted to test how well civilians could handle it. Rebecca explained, "We're watching different versions of our experiment colliding. We're seeing how different areas will respond to reality manipulation." But they never thought that reality itself might not let them control it. The last part of their conflict it wasn't just a battle between military forces or criminal enterprises. It was a fundamental question about the nature of existence itself. And the answer would prove far more powerful than any weapon they had developed. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as Hunt's teams initiated their final containment protocol through the chaos of overlapping timelines and spatial distortions. Rebecca watched them deploying equipment that threatened to rip Harborview from the fabric of existence. Multiple temporal convergence points were collapsing. Parker reported, her voice echoing across different versions of events. "The barriers between it's like all the possible realities are breaking down completely, and every version of Harborview is starting to merge." Rebecca's remaining surveillance feeds captured some pretty impossible scenes. There was the Death Rider, original gang violence, overlapping with professional military operations, BlackRock's corporate development existing simultaneously with classified research facilities, Kovac weapons trafficking, merging with reality-altering experiments. They thought they could compartmentalize it, but it's not that simple, Rebecca explained, analyzing patterns in the chaos, trying to keep their criminal operations separate from their corporate cover, hide their military research behind gang violence. But that's not how reality works. Everything is connected, and every action affects everything else. Through the visual distortions she tracked, Hunt's teams were making their final preparations. Their military precision had given way to desperate improvisation as they faced forces beyond their training or understanding. They were getting readings from other ports. Parker added, urgently, that the reality breaches were spreading through their entire network. Every area the Death Riders controlled was showing similar temporal instabilities. Rebecca's pattern recognition software had identified something crucial before it failed completely. The distortions weren't what they seemed. It was so interesting to see how the breaches were spreading through their entire network. They followed exact patterns of human activity, spreading faster through areas of conflict and resistance, and slower through places of community and cooperation. It was so fascinating to see how they were testing things. Rebecca realized it wasn't about physical infrastructure or security protocols. They were measuring how human consciousness affects reality itself, how our choices and actions shape the nature of existence. Her tactical display showed the full scope of their experiment before dissolving into temporal static. It was so interesting to see how everything was connected. The Death Riders' terror campaign, Black Rock's development projects, Kovac weapons operation, it was all connected. The experiment was designed to test how human behavior influences fundamental forces. Hunt's team is activating the final sequence. Parker warned them that they're going to try to seal everything into a temporal bubble. They're going to freeze this version of reality to prevent further contamination through overlapping timelines. Rebecca watched specialized teams deploying equipment that seemed to bend space and time around itself. It was their desperate attempt to contain the situation, but it threatened to trap Harbor View in an endless moment. They'd be forever separated from normal reality. They still think force is the answer, but Rebecca noted that they were making a fundamental error in their approach. They're trying to control reality with technology and military power, but they're ignoring the most powerful force involved, human choice. Suddenly, her systems detected massive temporal fluctuations. The containment protocols weren't just failing. They were catalyzing something unprecedented. Different versions of Harbor View began merging, not chaotically, but in patterns defined by human decisions and community bonds. Timeline convergence was accelerating. Parker reported that her words seemed to echo from multiple possibilities, but it's not random anymore. The merging realities are organizing themselves around human connections. Rebecca, I watched as different versions of the community began to align instead of creating chaos. The overlapping timelines revealed a deeper truth about Harbor View. It was a truth that went beyond criminal enterprises and military experiments. Look at the pattern, she instructed Parker. Where are the reality breaches that are most stable? She wanted to know where people stood together against the Death Riders. Where are they most chaotic? She wanted to know where fear and violence divided the community. Through the temporal distortions, she observed something remarkable. The strongest points of reality, the places most resistant to manipulation, were all about human relationships. There was Lisa's Diner, where the community gathered together despite gang threats. Then there was Marco's fishing dock, where neighbors helped rebuild after Death Rider attacks. And there was the community center, where people united against intimidation. They wanted to test reality manipulation. Rebecca explained that understanding finally clicked into place. But they never realized they were proving something far more important. The strongest force in any reality. It's the strongest force in any reality. Isn't it the human connection that's the most powerful force of all? Hunt's teams were struggling to maintain their containment protocols, but their equipment just wasn't up to the task. They tried to control reality through force, but that only served to strengthen the power of human choice and community bonds. The breaches are stabilizing, Parker reported with amazement. It wasn't their containment measures that had changed, but the people themselves. The community is somehow anchoring reality. Rebecca watched as Harbor View began settling into a new equilibrium. Not any single version of reality, but a synthesis that preserved the strength of human connection while exposing the truth of what had been attempted. They thought they could erase what they'd done, but it was actually the other way around. A new equilibrium was formed, not just any single version of reality, but a synthesis that preserved the strength of human connection while exposing the truth of what had been attempted. They thought they could erase what they'd done, but they were wrong, Rebecca noted, observing their failed experiment transforming into something unexpected. They tried to use military force to contain their mistakes, corporate power to hide their actions, and gang violence to mask their true purpose. But they never understood the real power they were dealing with. The war for Harbor View had transcended all of that. The conventional understanding was that what started as a simple act of gang intimidation had exposed not just criminal enterprises or military experiments, but a fundamental truth about reality itself. Major Rebecca Anderson was about to show them why the strongest force in any universe isn't the power to change reality. It's the human will to preserve what matters most. As dawn broke over Harbor View, painting the sky in colors that seemed somehow more vibrant than before, through the settling reality distortions, Rebecca watched the A community was emerging to reclaim their neighborhood, not just from criminal enterprises or military experiments, but from those who would try to rewrite existence itself. The final readings were coming in, and Parker reported through their now stabilized communication channel that the temporal breaches were sealing themselves, not from Hunt's containment protocols, but from something more fundamental: human consciousness anchoring reality through shared experience across the waterfront. Rebecca observed the aftermath of their unprecedented conflict. The sophisticated operation, which had been going on for so long, had been exposed at every level, from street violence to corporate corruption to classified military research. But more importantly, it had revealed something about the nature of reality itself. Hunt's teams are withdrawing, she noted, watching their military precision now tinged with uncertainty. Their equipment's useless against what's happening. You can't fight reality with weapons when human choice is the stronger force. Through her restored surveillance network, she tracked multiple threads of their operation unraveling. It's like all the threads of their operation are unraveling. Federal agents have found evidence that exists across several timelines at once. Corporate records have shown that there are multiple versions of the truth, and they're all coming together to form undeniable proof. Even the Death Riders' attempt to control territory through fear has been transformed into evidence of community resistance. Parker has also been getting reports from other ports, and it seems like similar stabilizations are happening all over the country. It's not just that the reality breaches are sealing things up, they're also preserving evidence of what was attempted. It's so interesting how the attempt to erase the truth has somehow made it more permanent. Rebecca's systems showed the full scope of what had been revealed. The Death Riders hadn't just been a gang. They were unwitting test subjects in an experiment that threatened existence itself. Their evolution from drunk bikers to a sophisticated military operation had exposed forces beyond conventional understanding. They wanted to test civilian infrastructure, Rebecca explained, watching Harbor View settle into its new normal and see how different areas would respond to it. Reality manipulation, but they never considered that human consciousness might be the strongest stabilizing force in any universe. Through her feeds, she observed the community rebuilding, not just physical structures, but the bonds that had proven stronger than any attempt to rewrite reality. Lisa's Diner once again became a gathering place, its simple truth as a community anchor more powerful than any corporate development or military research. Multiple federal agencies are responding, Parker reported, but something's different. The evidence isn't just about criminal enterprises or classified operations anymore. It's about fundamental forces that can't be hidden or controlled. Rebecca watched as various versions of truth aligned into something undeniable. She saw how the Death Riders' attempt to control territory through fear, BlackRock's corporate manipulation, KAC's weapons trafficking, and Hunt's military experiments had all been exposed. They were seen not just as criminal activity, but as a fundamental violation of reality itself. Final containment protocols failed completely. She was pleased to see that they hadn't made any mistakes in their tactics or equipment. It was because they never understood what they were really fighting. You can't erase truth when human consciousness preserves it across all possible realities. Her surveillance showed Harbor View transforming, not back to what it was, but into something stronger. The community had faced not just criminal intimidation or military force, but an attempt to rewrite their very existence. Their resistance had proven that human connection was the most powerful force in any reality. Parker asked, watching federal teams struggling to process evidence that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Now the real work begins, Rebecca replied. Not just exposing criminal enterprises or classified operations, but understanding something fundamental about existence itself. Reality isn't maintained by force or control. It's anchored by human choice and connection through the settling temporal distortions I observed. The final outcome of their unprecedented. Despite the Death Riders' sophisticated operation being dismantled at every level, from street violence to reality manipulation, it had revealed a truth that no power could erase. The war for Harbor View had evolved beyond conventional understanding. What started as drunk bikers harassing a Marine had exposed not just criminal enterprises or military experiments, but a fundamental truth about reality itself. Major Rebecca Anderson had shown them why the strongest force in any universe isn't the power to change reality. It's the human will to preserve what matters most. You can change reality if you want to. It's all down to human will. Harbor View is proof that there's something more powerful than any weapon or experiment the community has faced. Forces that threaten to rewrite existence itself have been proved wrong. Human connection is the strongest anchor in any reality. The Death Riders started this war thinking they were untouchable. They've learned that some forces can't be controlled. They can only be witnessed, understood, and remembered across all possible versions of truth. And somewhere in the settling reality distortions, a small diner continued serving coffee to neighbors who had stood together against forces that threatened not just their community, but existence itself. Because in any universe across all possible timelines, the simplest truths prove the most powerful. No force can erase what human consciousness chooses to preserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to miss these next 2. Just click and check them out.